My name is Rebecca, and I'm 27 years old. If someone had asked me 10 years ago where I'd be today, I would have never imagined the answer. Life has a strange way of testing you when you least expect it, and for me, those tests began when I was just 15 years old. I was raised in a small suburban town by two loving parents, my mother, Helen, who owned a charming little flower shop downtown, and my father, James, who taught English literature at the local high school. We didn't have a lot of money, but our home was full of warmth, laughter, and long conversations over dinner about poetry, wildflowers, and dreams. My childhood was simple, safe, and filled with the kind of love that makes you believe nothing bad can ever happen. That illusion shattered one Tuesday afternoon in spring. I still remember the way the sky looked: blue, cloudless, peaceful. I had just gotten home from school, dumped my backpack near the door, and was about to grab a snack when the phone rang. I didn't think much of it until I heard my father's voice on the answering machine, shaky and urgent. Then my neighbor, Mrs. Coleman, came rushing in through the back door, her face pale. "Rebecca, your mother collapsed at the shop," she said quickly. "Your dad's on his way to the hospital with her." Everything after that was a blur. I barely remember the ride to the hospital. What I do remember is sitting in a hard plastic chair under flickering lights while nurses walked back and forth like ghosts. After what felt like hours, a doctor approached my father and me. He looked exhausted, like someone who had delivered too many pieces of bad news that day. "I'm so sorry," he said softly. "Helen had a massive heart attack. We did everything we could." I didn't cry at first. I just sat there, numb, staring at my father as he covered his face with both hands and leaned forward like the air had been knocked out of him. That night, everything changed. Our home, once filled with the scent of roses and the sound of soft jazz playing from the kitchen radio, felt silent and cold. My father tried to hold it together for me, and I tried to be strong for him. But the emptiness left behind by my mother's sudden death was like a heavy curtain that draped over everything. Just a few months after we lost her, tragedy struck again. One rainy evening, my father was biking home from a school meeting when a car ran a red light and hit him head-on. He survived, but barely. When I saw him in the hospital days later, he was awake but pale, his legs wrapped in bandages, his body covered in bruises. The doctors told us the impact had shattered his lower spine. He would never walk again. I remember him reaching for my hand and whispering, "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry." I didn't understand why he was apologizing. It wasn't his fault. But now I know, he was apologizing for the life we were about to live, one where everything would be harder. My father, James, was a strong man, not just in body but in will. After the accident, he never once let his condition define him. He sold his motorcycle, converted our garage into a bedroom with a ramp, and taught himself how to use a motorized wheelchair. Though he couldn't return to teaching in a classroom, he began offering online tutoring and editing work from home. He adapted, and slowly so did I. Our lives were no longer what they used to be, but somehow, we found a new rhythm. Just the two of us. I'd help him with meals, organize his tutoring schedule, and we'd still talk for hours in the evenings. Only now, our conversations were often about resilience, about letting go, and about surviving what life throws at you. I didn't know it then, but those years of learning to endure and adjust would shape everything that came next. High school flew by in a haze of quiet days, small victories, and hidden pain. While other kids talked about parties and proms, I spent most of my evenings cooking dinner for Dad or helping him manage his online tutoring sessions. I never complained. Taking care of him felt natural, like an extension of my love for him and everything we had lost. But Dad never wanted me to feel trapped. "You're still allowed to live your life, Rebecca," he would often say. "Don't build your future around my limits." When I graduated high school, he insisted I apply for colleges away from home. "Spread your wings, sweetheart," he told me, gripping the arms of his wheelchair as he tried to hold back emotion. "I'll be fine. You've done more than enough." I hesitated, but he was right. So, I enrolled in the State University of New York to study accounting, a field I knew would offer stability. I wasn't chasing passion, I was chasing security. Something reliable. Something my life hadn't given me in years. College was overwhelming at first. Being away from home, from Dad, felt like I had left part of my heart behind. I called him every night. He never missed a single call. I'd tell him about my classes and roommates. He'd tell me about his students and the new rose bush he was trying to grow on the porch. It kept us close. In my sophomore year, I met Zoe during an intro to economics class. She was funny, wild, and completely opposite of me. She wore leather jackets and red lipstick, while I wore oversized hoodies and drank chamomile tea. But somehow we clicked. She didn't ask questions I didn't want to answer, and she never made me feel like the girl with the disabled dad. We became best friends. One night, Zoe invited me to her cousin's birthday party off campus. I almost didn't go. I hated big gatherings, but something told me to try. That's the night I met Lucas. He was leaning against the kitchen counter, talking to a group of friends about his recent road trip through Colorado. He was a long-haul truck driver, down to earth, with kind eyes and a voice that made people stop and listen. We ended up talking for an hour about music, road food, and childhood dreams. When I told him about my dad, I waited for the awkward silence. But it never came. "That's awesome," he said, smiling. "He sounds like a strong guy. You must be, too." I remember feeling something warm rise in my chest, like someone had finally seen me without flinching. Our relationship started slow. Long phone calls turned into coffee dates. Coffee dates turned into weekends visiting home. When Lucas met my dad, they bonded almost instantly. I watched them sit on the back porch talking about jazz and grilled ribs like they'd known each other for years. "Your dad's a legend," Lucas told me later. "You're amazing for taking care of him all these years. That kind of loyalty, that's rare." No one had ever said anything like that to me before. For the first time since Mom died, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could have a life that didn't just revolve around surviving. Maybe I could have something more: love, laughter, a future. After I graduated, everything began falling into place. I landed a job at a local tax service firm not far from home, and Lucas started getting more regular trucking routes that brought him close by. We dated for 4 years, slowly building a life of shared plans and silent dreams. One autumn evening, while we were walking through the park where we'd had our first date, he got down on one knee and proposed with a simple silver ring and a shaky smile. I said yes, but with one condition. "I can't leave my dad," I whispered. "He needs me." Lucas didn't even blink. "Then we all live together," he said, pulling me into his arms. "It's always been the three of us, hasn't it? Let's make it official." And so we did. The wedding was small, just close friends, co-workers, and a few cousins. But it was perfect. Dad insisted on wheeling himself down the aisle to give me away. I still remember his proud face as he placed my hand into Lucas's. There wasn't a dry eye in sight. I stood there holding Lucas's hand, thinking, this is it. This is the beginning of something good. I had no idea then that the beginning of something good was also the beginning of something else entirely, something far more complicated. The first few months after the wedding were a quiet kind of bliss. Lucas moved into the townhouse my father and I had shared for years. It wasn't big or modern, but it was warm, filled with memories and laughter. We made small changes, new curtains, a coat of paint, extra shelves in the kitchen, but the soul of the place stayed the same. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like life was settling. Like maybe all the pain we had endured had finally led us here, to something stable, something kind. But light has a way of casting shadows, and mine came in the form of Janet and Vanessa. I first met them properly during a family dinner organized by Zoe. I had expected awkward small talk, maybe a little tension. I was not prepared for the cold, calculating smiles that met me at the door. Janet, Lucas's mother, had perfectly styled hair and a sharp gaze that cut through me before she even said a word. Vanessa, his younger sister, barely looked up from her phone. "So, you're Rebecca," Janet said, slowly taking in my thrifted dress and nervous posture. "Lucas didn't mention you were so humble." I tried to smile. "It's nice to meet you." Her next question hit me like a slap. "Your father is the man in the wheelchair, right?" "He's disabled, yes," I replied calmly. But he's an editor. How sweet, she interrupted, clearly uninterested in hearing more. Then, turning to Lucas with an almost theatrical sigh, she added, "Are you sure about this? There are so many girls from good families, ones who don't come with so many attachments." I felt the blood rush to my cheeks. I wanted to disappear. But before I could say a word, Lucas stood up, jaw clenched. "Mom," he said firmly, "Rebecca is from a good family. Her father is a better man than most I know. And I love her. That's all that matters." Janet said nothing more, but I could see it in her eyes. The disapproval, the judgment, the quiet war she had just declared. Vanessa, for her part, followed her mother's lead. Every time we met after that, she'd make backhanded comments or pointedly ignore me. Once, I overheard her whisper to Janet, "He could have done so much better. Now he's stuck with her and her crippled dad." I wanted to scream, to tell them how much we had fought to survive, how hard my father had worked, how much love there was in our home. But instead, I stayed quiet, for Lucas's sake. I told myself they didn't matter. That as long as Lucas and I were strong, nothing else did. Lucas did his best to shield me from their bitterness. He rarely invited them over, and when he did, he made sure Dad wasn't left out. We'd have dinner as a family, and Lucas would steer the conversation toward neutral topics. But the tension was always there, hanging over us like a storm cloud. Still, life moved forward. I went to work each day at the tax office, helping clients organize their chaotic finances. Lucas was on the road most weeks, driving coast to coast, hauling everything from furniture to medical supplies. When he came home, we'd sit on the back porch with Dad, eating dinner under the string lights Lucas had hung up one weekend. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I had a husband who loved me, a father who supported me, and a home that felt safe. Then one evening, as the air began to cool and the leaves turned golden, Lucas called me from his truck. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice full of cautious excitement. "What if we moved? Got a new place, bigger, better for your dad. One with a backyard, maybe even space for a garden?" I glanced at my father, who was half listening from across the room, pretending not to be eavesdropping. "What do you think, Dad?" I asked, putting Lucas on speaker. James's eyes lit up. "A garden sounds nice," he said. "And it'd be easier for me to get outside more." That was all the encouragement we needed. In the weeks that followed, we searched for a new home. One with wide doorways, a roll-in shower, and a bright, sunny yard. We found it on a quiet street just outside town. It was perfect. The mortgage was steep, but with Lucas's income, mine, and the rent we could earn from our old apartment, we managed. The day we moved in, Dad wheeled himself onto the new patio, took a deep breath, and said, "This feels like the beginning of something beautiful." I believed him. But I didn't know that even the most beautiful beginnings can be followed by the darkest storms. The weeks after the move were some of the most peaceful I had ever experienced. There was something about the way sunlight poured into the kitchen each morning, how the trees rustled outside Dad's window, and the soft hum of life unfolding in a place we could finally call our own. I planted a small vegetable garden in the backyard, nothing fancy, just tomatoes, carrots, and a few herbs. Dad loved sitting out there in the evenings, watching the leaves dance in the wind while I watered the beds and Lucas grilled dinner on the patio. We were happy. Not in the way movies show happiness, with dramatic declarations and perfect moments, but in the quiet, content way that grows deep roots. Life wasn't easy. Lucas was still on the road a lot, and I worked full-time, but we had created something solid. Something sacred. That's when we decided to throw a housewarming party. We invited friends from work, a few neighbors, and yes, despite my reservations, Lucas asked his mother Janet and sister Vanessa to come. "It's just one evening," he said gently. "Let's try to make peace." I forced a smile and agreed, though a tight knot of dread had already settled in my stomach. The day of the party was bright and warm. Guests filled our new home with laughter, stories, and the smell of barbecue. Dad was in his element, chatting with everyone, especially Lucas's trucking buddies who had an endless supply of road stories. For a while, it felt like everything really was going to be okay. Then they arrived. Janet and Vanessa walked in nearly an hour late, dressed like they were attending a cocktail gala instead of a backyard party. Janet's eyes scanned the house with thinly veiled envy. "Charming," she muttered. Vanessa trailed behind her, barely acknowledging me or my father. I tried to be polite, offering them drinks and making small talk, but they had already decided not to be part of our celebration. Janet lingered in each room, making quiet comments like, "Interesting choice of paint color," and, "Oh, the floors are original? That explains the creaking." Vanessa just scrolled through her phone, occasionally asking where the guest Wi-Fi password was written. Then came the moment that changed everything. We were walking through the house, showing a small group of guests the master bedroom when Janet pulled me aside. Her voice was calm, almost casual. "You know," she said, "this room would be perfect for Lucas and me." I blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, what?" She smiled. "Why don't you send your father to a nursing facility? He's not really suited for this kind of luxury. He's had his time. Let someone else enjoy the space." I felt like the floor had been yanked out from under me. "He's my father," I managed to say, my voice shaking. "And this is his home." She shrugged, completely unfazed. "You're young. You'll adjust. A proper nursing home would take better care of him anyway." Before I could respond, she turned and walked toward the patio, where Dad was talking to some guests. And then, in a moment that made my blood turn cold, she grabbed the handles of his wheelchair. "Let's go for a little ride, shall we?" she said sweetly, pushing him toward the driveway. I dropped everything and ran. "Janet, what are you doing?" She looked at me with a strange, forced smile. "You said he needed to be outside. I'm just helping." "He's not going anywhere," I shouted, stepping between her and the path. "Let go of the chair." That's when Lucas appeared. He had heard the commotion and came running, his face flushed with anger. "Mom," he said, his voice low and furious. "What the hell are you doing?" "Let go of Larry's chair."
"Right. Now."
Janet froze. I don't want to hear it." Lucas cut her off. "You and Vanessa need to leave.
Now."
The guests were silent. Vanessa, startled by Lucas's tone, quickly followed her mother out the door. Janet didn't say another word, but her eyes burned with something darker than embarrassment. After they left, Lucas turned to Dad and me, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea she'd do something like that. I'm so sorry." Dad placed a calm hand on Lucas's. "It's not your fault, son. Some people just don't understand." That night, after everyone else had gone, I sat on the patio with Dad and Lucas. None of us said much. The stars were bright, but the air felt heavier than it had in weeks. We had a beautiful new home, a small garden, and a life we had worked so hard to build. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was far from over. In the days that followed the party, things began to shift in subtle but undeniable ways. Janet and Vanessa stopped calling, and there were no more uninvited visits. For a time, it felt like the tension had broken, like maybe they'd finally taken the hint and decided to stay out of our lives. I didn't miss them. In fact, the silence was a relief. Lucas, though disappointed in their behavior, was grateful for the quiet too. He poured himself into work, taking on more trucking routes to help with the new mortgage and our living expenses. I missed him when he was gone, but we made it work. Late-night calls, silly texts, and the way his arms wrapped around me whenever he was home made the distance easier. At home, I kept at my job at the tax office and cared for Dad, who seemed to thrive in our new environment. He spent afternoons on the patio, his laptop open beside him as he edited college essays for his online clients. Every now and then, I'd find a fresh flower clipped and placed in a glass jar on the kitchen table, his quiet way of saying, "I'm still here." For years passed like pages in a journal, each one filled with routine and small joys. We weren't wealthy or glamorous, but we were content. Lucas would often talk about the future. "Maybe one day I'll stop driving long routes," he'd say, arms around me while we stood in the backyard. "Open a little local delivery service, stay closer to home." I'd smile and nod, imagining a life with him home more often, maybe even children running through the grass, laughter echoing off the fence. It was a simple dream, but sometimes simple dreams are the ones that break your heart the hardest. One afternoon, as I was organizing client files at work, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to answer. "Hello," I said. "Mrs. Walker?" A voice responded. "This is Officer Blake from the State Highway Patrol. I'm afraid there's been an accident involving your husband, Lucas Walker." My body went cold. I couldn't breathe. The words that followed came in pieces: head-on collision, fatal injuries, didn't make it to the hospital. My hand trembled as I clutched the desk for support. I didn't hear the rest. It all blurred into white noise. Somewhere in the background, I heard myself whisper, "Thank you," before the call ended. I sat there frozen, the phone slipping from my hand. Lucas was gone. The next week passed in fog. I moved through each day like a ghost, planning the funeral, answering questions, trying to hold myself together for Dad, who kept whispering, "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," every time he looked at me. Friends brought food, coworkers sent flowers, but nothing filled the gaping hole inside me. I'd built a life around Lucas, shared dreams and laughter, and just like that, it was gone. The night before the funeral, I did something I had dreaded but knew was necessary. I called Janet. She deserved to hear it from me, no matter how she had treated me. She answered on the second ring, her voice clipped. "Hello. It's Rebecca," I said, my voice shaking. "There's been an accident. Lucas, he's gone." There was silence. Then, to my shock, her tone shifted, not to grief, but rage. "This is your fault," she snapped. "You made him work like a mule to pay for your fancy house. He wouldn't have been on that road if it weren't for you. You killed my son." My breath caught in my throat. "Janet, no. Save it," she spat. "You better give him the kind of funeral he deserves. But don't expect a dime from us. You made your bed. Now lie in it." Then she hung up. I stared at the phone, hands trembling, and for the first time since the call from Officer Blake, I broke. The tears came hard and fast. I sank to the floor of the kitchen, the same kitchen where we used to drink coffee and laugh about his weird road stories. Now all I had left was silence. The day of the funeral was gray and drizzling. It felt right, like the world itself was mourning. The church was packed with people who loved Lucas. Drivers from his company, neighbors, clients he had helped over the years, all came to pay their respects. But Janet and Vanessa never showed. Not even a message. Not even a flower. After the service, as I helped my father into the car, I whispered, "They didn't come." Dad touched my hand gently. "That's their burden to carry. We showed up with love. That's all that matters." As we pulled into our driveway that afternoon, I noticed something strange. The front lights were on, even though I was sure I had turned them off. I frowned. "Dad, did you leave anything on when we left?"
He shook his head. "No."
I'm sure I didn't. As we got closer, I saw movement through the living room window. My stomach dropped. I helped Dad out of the car and rushed to the door, my heart pounding. Inside, we were met with the last thing I expected. Janet and Vanessa, standing in my living room, surrounded by open boxes and half-packed belongings. I stood frozen in the doorway, disbelief crawling up my spine. My living room, our living room, looked like a moving truck had exploded inside it. Picture frames were off the walls. Kitchen drawers stood open. Half of Lucas's tools were packed into boxes labeled garage. Janet was standing near the mantel, dusting it off with a tissue, like she already owned the place. Vanessa sat on the couch with her feet up, scrolling on her phone, completely at ease. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. Janet turned around slowly, not even startled. Her expression was cool, rehearsed. "Oh, Rebecca," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "We were just helping you pack up. After all, you can't possibly afford to stay here now that Lucas is gone." I was too stunned to speak. Vanessa added with a fake sweet smile, "We figured you'd be moving back into your father's little apartment. It's cozy, right? I looked at my dad, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair, his face a storm of quiet rage. I could feel the heat rising through me, a tremble that turned into fire. Get out, I said, stepping forward, my hands clenched. This house is mine. Lucas and I bought it together. You have no right to be here. Janet raised an eyebrow like I was being dramatic. This house belonged to our son. We're his family. Of course we have a right. You weren't even at his funeral, I snapped. You didn't shed a single tear. You didn't even say goodbye. We were busy, Janet said flatly. There were arrangements to make. What arrangements? I shot back. A takeover? She scoffed. Don't be childish. You're young. You'll get over him. Honestly, I thought you'd have moved on by now. I felt my stomach twist. And be a good girl, she added, turning toward the door. Start packing. We'll meet you here tomorrow morning to continue. That was it. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling the police, I said calmly, though my voice shook with fury. You broke into my home. You're trespassing. That got their attention. Janet's face paled slightly. Vanessa sat up straighter. Now wait just a minute, Janet started, but I cut her off. You have 10 minutes to get out, I said, stepping closer. Before Officer Blake gets here and arrests both of you. This is not your house. It never was. Janet looked like she wanted to slap me. Vanessa was already gathering her purse. But I wasn't done. Lucas left everything to me, I continued. Legally, officially. You want to challenge that? Go ahead. I've got lawyers too. But right now, you're standing in my house without permission. So, unless you want a police report added to your day, leave. Vanessa grabbed her mother's arm. Let's go, she whispered urgently. Janet stared at me with venom in her eyes. This isn't over, Rebecca. You'll be hearing from our lawyers. I'll be waiting, I replied, shutting the door behind them. Once they were gone, the house felt quiet again, but not peaceful. I leaned against the wall, breathing hard, while Dad rolled closer and took my hand. I'm proud of you, he said gently. That took courage. I've had enough, I whispered. No more tiptoeing. No more playing nice. That night, I sat alone in our bedroom and looked around at everything Lucas had touched. His flannel shirt still hung on the back of a chair. His boots were by the closet. The scent of his aftershave still lingered faintly in the air. My chest tightened. I thought I had reached my limit. I thought I had felt every ounce of pain one heart could hold. But fate still had more in store. A week passed after Janet and Vanessa stormed out of the house, but the echoes of their presence lingered like dust in the corners. I spent those days in a daze, sorting through Lucas's things, answering sympathy cards, and sleeping too little. Every corner of our home whispered his name, and I couldn't walk through a single room without stumbling over a memory. My dad, always quiet in his grief, never pushed me to talk. Instead, he kept busy, editing work from his laptop, keeping the garden watered, and gently reminding me to eat. One afternoon, just as I was finishing up dishes, the phone rang again. This time a calm, professional voice on the other end. Mrs. Walker, this is Mr. Clark from Clark and Associates, the man said. Your late husband, Mr. Lucas Walker, prepared a will with our office approximately 5 months ago. I'd like to schedule a meeting with you to go over the details. I blinked. He left a will? Yes, ma'am. He asked that we contact you only in the event of his passing. Are you available to come in tomorrow morning? I murmured a yes, my heart pounding. That night, I sat with Dad on the patio as twilight folded around us. He made a will, I said softly. He never told me. Dad nodded. Lucas always looked out for you. Maybe he didn't want to worry you. The next morning, I wheeled Dad into the law office with me. Mr. Clark, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a navy blue tie, greeted us warmly and invited us to sit across from his polished oak desk. He opened a thin file marked Lucas Walker and cleared his throat. I'm deeply sorry for your loss, he began, glancing at me with genuine sympathy. Your husband made it very clear that he wanted everything in place to protect you and your father. He began reading. I, Lucas Walker, being of sound mind and body, do hereby leave all of my possessions, including but not limited to our shared home, savings, vehicle, and any insurances, to my beloved wife, Rebecca Walker. It is my wish that she use these resources to care for herself and for James David, whom I consider family. I covered my mouth as the tears came. Mr. Clark paused and then added, There's also a letter he left behind for you. He handed me an envelope, yellowed slightly around the edges, with my name written in Lucas's messy handwriting. My fingers shook as I opened it. My dear Rebecca, if you're reading this, it means something happened, and for that I'm sorry. I never wanted to leave you like this, but I want you to know you were my peace in a chaotic world. You and your dad gave me something I never had before. Real family. Real purpose. I know my mother and sister can be difficult. I didn't tell you about this, Will, because I didn't want to stress you. But I've seen the way they look at you, the way they dismiss James. I won't let them win. Everything we built is yours, legally and rightfully. Live your life boldly. Love our child when the time comes, yes, I was hoping, and never forget how fiercely you are loved. Always yours, Lucas. The paper blurred as my tears fell freely. I clutched it to my chest, breathing in the faint scent of him still left on the ink. Mr. Clark gave me a moment to gather myself, then added gently, There's one more thing. Lucas's truck was fully insured. Given the nature of the accident, the company has approved a full payout. You'll be receiving a check soon, enough to pay off the mortgage entirely and still have financial security. I looked up, stunned. What do I do with all this? Mr. Clark smiled kindly. You live, Mrs. Walker. You carry forward. We left the office in silence, but inside me, something had shifted. Not relief exactly, but strength. Lucas had protected me from beyond the grave. He had planned every step, thought of every detail, and left me not with just memories, but with hope. As we pulled into the driveway, I noticed a car parked by the curb. My stomach dropped. It was Janet's sleek silver sedan. I took a deep breath. I wasn't the same woman they had bullied before. Not anymore. As I stepped out of the car and helped Dad out, my eyes remained fixed on the front porch where Janet and Vanessa stood waiting. They looked different, less smug, more anxious, but the sight of them still made my blood run cold. Vanessa shifted from foot to foot, avoiding my gaze, while Janet stood stiff and composed, a faint forced smile curling at the edges of her mouth. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her, like she was preparing for a polite conversation. I wasn't interested in politeness. I held the gate open for Dad, who rolled up beside me, calm but alert. The silence hung in the air as I walked up the steps, every part of me alert and ready. What do you want, Janet? I asked, not bothering to hide the exhaustion in my voice. Janet opened her mouth, hesitated, then said, We need to talk. I didn't respond. I just stared at her, arms crossed. Vanessa stepped in, her voice soft and unsure. We've hit some hard times. With everything that's happened, we were wondering if we could stay in your father's old apartment, just until we get back on our feet. I blinked slowly, processing what I'd just heard. After everything they had said, after breaking into our home, after accusing me of killing Lucas, they had the audacity to ask for help? I'm sorry, I said firmly. That's not possible. Vanessa glanced at Janet, her mouth twitching with discomfort. Janet's face, however, was morphing. Her eyes had landed on me. No, not me, my belly. I followed her gaze instinctively and realized the edge of my shirt had pulled tighter against my stomach. She froze. You're pregnant? She asked, her voice now laced with something sharp and venomous. I nodded slowly. I didn't know her the truth, but I wasn't going to lie either. Janet's expression twisted. Already, she hissed. So quick to move on. Paul's body isn't even cold in the ground, and you're already spreading your legs for someone else. The words hit like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I felt something rise inside me. Something stronger than rage. It was clarity. This child is Lucas's, I said coldly. He's part of him.
Part of me.
And he will never, ever know the kind of hatred you've shown. Janet's mouth opened, But I didn't give her the chance. You called me names. You tried to take my home. You never cared about Lucas, not really. You were more upset about losing control than losing a son. Rebecca, Vanessa tried, but I cut her off with a glance. I'm done explaining myself. You're not welcome here. You're not part of my life. And this baby, I said, resting a hand on my stomach, will never have to endure the poison you carry. Janet's face flushed deep red. You think you're better than us now? No, I said calmly. I always was. Vanessa tugged at her mother's sleeve. Let's go, she muttered. They turned and walked back to the car. Janet gave me one last bitter glare before climbing in and slamming the door shut. I stood there silently as they drove away, a strange stillness settling in the air. Dad rolled up next to me. You okay? I looked down at my belly and nodded. I am now. Inside, I placed Lucas's letter back into the drawer beside our bed. I whispered a silent promise to him that I would protect this child, our child, and raise him with all the love we once dreamed of. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something bloom in my chest. Not grief, not anger, hope. The weeks that followed were slow, but not empty. Something had shifted deep inside me after that last confrontation with Janet and Vanessa. I no longer walked through the house as a widow haunted by absence. I walked as a mother, carrying a piece of Lucas with every breath I took. Each morning, I sat at the edge of the bed, pressing my hand to the soft curve of my belly, whispering things I used to say to him. I read books aloud, made simple dinners, and let myself laugh when Dad cracked one of his bad puns. There was sadness, yes, but the weight of it was no longer unbearable. It had softened at the edges. Dad was my rock. Every time he wheeled out into the garden, he checked the soil like it was sacred. He'd have been proud of this basil, he'd say, smiling as he plucked a few leaves. I would smile back, even through the lump in my throat. The insurance payout came through not long after. Just as Mr. Clark had promised, the money was more than enough. I paid off the mortgage immediately. For the first time in years, we were completely debt-free. I met with a financial advisor and put the rest in savings, some for the baby, some for future repairs, some for peace of mind. I wasn't rich, but I was safe. And that was something. One quiet afternoon, I was organizing Lucas's desk, more out of habit than purpose, when I found something I hadn't seen before. A small, leather-bound notebook tucked behind a stack of envelopes. His handwriting covered every page, chaotic and scribbled, but still so familiar. I sat down and began reading. He had written about everything: memories of our first date, long drives through Texas, silly things like my bad singing in the car, and the time I burnt the pancakes. But then the entries changed. Thinking about starting a college fund for our future kid. Rebecca wants a garden. Note to self: build her one with raised beds for her back. Want to surprise her with a trip next year. Maybe the coast. She deserves the ocean. I pressed the notebook to my chest and let the tears come. Not from pain, but from love. So much love that it spilled from the pages and wrapped around me like a hug I had almost forgotten. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my thoughts a tangled mess of memories and wonderings. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of Lucas. He was standing in our garden barefoot, smiling. He reached for my hand and whispered, "It's okay, Rebecca. Everything's going to be all right." I woke up with the sunrise pouring through the window. My heart beat steady. My hands rested on my belly. And then it hit me. A wave of nausea, so strong I barely made it to the bathroom. It wasn't like the usual morning queasiness. This was deep, persistent. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I hadn't eaten enough. Maybe it was stress. But it didn't stop. Days passed, and the sickness returned each morning like clockwork. I found myself exhausted, emotional over nothing, craving strange things I hadn't touched in years, like grape jam on toast and pickles with cheese. Something inside me said, "This isn't just grief. This is something else." One day, I stood frozen in the pharmacy aisle, staring at a box of pregnancy tests. I picked one up with trembling fingers, paid at the self-checkout, and hurried home. I closed the bathroom door and followed the instructions exactly. Then I sat on the floor, clutching my knees as the seconds dragged into minutes. When I looked at the stick, there they were, 2 unmistakable blue lines. Positive. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So I did both. A knock came at the door. "Everything okay in there, sweetheart?" Dad's voice called gently. I opened the door, the test still in my hand, my face wet with tears. "I'm pregnant," I said. He looked at me for a long moment, then pulled me into his arms, holding me close as he used to when I was a child sobbing over scraped knees and broken hearts. "It's going to be okay," he whispered into my hair. "You're not alone. And this baby is a blessing." I nodded, holding on to him tightly. It's a piece of him. And just like that, I knew I would raise this child in the world Lucas left behind, with love, with strength, and with everything he gave me. The days that followed were a delicate mix of quiet reflection and cautious joy. I hadn't expected to carry part of Lucas into the future like this, but now that I was, it felt like the universe had handed me back a small light in all the darkness. I was about 9 weeks along when I first heard the baby's heartbeat, quick and fluttering like the sound of wings. I cried during the entire appointment. The nurse placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and simply said, "He would have been proud." I started keeping a journal for the baby just like Lucas had done for me. I wrote letters, memories, stories of our love, and how brave their father had been. I didn't know yet if I was having a boy or a girl, but I already knew this child was loved beyond measure. Dad was constantly checking on me. He made sure I ate 3 full meals a day, kept a bottle of water nearby, and gently scolded me if I stood too long. "You're not carrying groceries, Rebecca," he said one morning. "You're carrying a legacy." One evening, I sat in the nursery-to-be, formerly Lucas's reading room, and ran my fingers along the bookshelves. I had moved his favorite novels to a corner and placed a rocking chair by the window. There, I imagined myself holding our child, whispering stories in the golden afternoon light. And then, just as things were beginning to feel peaceful again, it happened. I was in the middle of folding baby clothes, small onesies I had bought secondhand, when the doorbell rang. I peeked through the window. Janet and Vanessa. I inhaled slowly, my hands instinctively resting over my growing belly. Opening the door halfway, I stood tall. "What now?" I asked plainly. Janet looked tired. She wasn't wearing her usual pristine makeup, and her scarf was twisted awkwardly. Vanessa looked tense, her eyes darting nervously. "We need a place to stay," Janet said without a trace of her usual arrogance. "We lost our condo. Vanessa lost her job, and, well, we were wondering if we could stay in James's old apartment. Just until we get back on our feet." The audacity nearly knocked the wind out of me. "You want to stay in my father's apartment?" I said slowly. "After accusing me of killing my husband? After trying to steal my home?" "We were grieving," Janet said, lifting her chin. "We said things we didn't mean." "No," I said. "You said exactly what you meant. You've always meant every cruel word." Vanessa spoke up, her voice cracking. "Please, Rebecca. We're desperate." I could have said yes. I could have extended the mercy they had never once shown me. But then Janet's eyes flickered to my stomach, and her expression changed. "You're pregnant," she snapped. "Already?" I said nothing. I didn't need to explain myself to her. "You little whore," she spat. "Paul's body isn't even cold in the ground, and you're already carrying some other man's child?" A slow, rising heat spread through me, but this time it wasn't shame. It was strength. "This child," I said slowly, "is Lucas's. And he made sure that you and Vanessa would never be part of our lives again. He knew who you were. He protected us, even from the grave." Vanessa reached for her mother's arm, whispering, "Let's just go." But Janet wasn't finished. "You think you've won," she hissed. "You think you're better than us because you got the house and the baby and the money.
But this won't last.
You'll end up just like your crippled father." I took a deep breath and looked her straight in the eye. "You don't get to talk about my father," I said coldly. "You don't get to be in our lives. You don't get to poison this child with your bitterness. So take your hate and your broken pride and leave. Because if you come near me again, you won't just be facing a locked door, you'll be facing a courtroom." Janet stared at me, speechless. Vanessa pulled her back, and this time, she didn't resist. I watched from the porch as they walked back to the car and drove off. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. Instead, I placed a hand over my belly and whispered, "You're safe now. I promise." Inside, Dad waited for me in the hallway. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded. "I think I'm finally free." And I was. Free from fear. Free from guilt. Free from the ghosts of people who never really loved us. That night, I opened Lucas's notebook again and wrote a new line beneath his last entry. "The garden is growing, and so is our future." As the weeks rolled on, my belly rounded with quiet purpose. Each morning I woke to soft flutters that grew stronger with time, reminders that life was continuing inside me, even as I grieved what had been lost. The house, once filled with the sound of Lucas's boots on the hardwood floor, now echoed with the rhythm of my new beginning. I started setting aside one drawer at a time for the baby: tiny socks, secondhand storybooks, and a blanket Dad had knitted, stitch by careful stitch. Dad and I developed a rhythm that felt almost sacred. He took over watering the garden each morning while I rested, and in the afternoons, we'd sit under the shade of the back patio. He'd tell me old family stories, some funny, some bittersweet, his voice warm and steady, like a lighthouse guiding me through everything unknown. One morning, as I was sorting through Lucas's boxes again, I found a sealed envelope tucked inside one of his flannel shirts. It was addressed in his handwriting. "For when it's time." I stared at it for a long while before opening it. Inside was a letter, shorter than the first one, but just as powerful. "Rebecca, if you're reading this, then it means the future we hoped for is on its way. Maybe you're scared. Maybe you're alone. But you're going to be an incredible mother. Teach them how to be kind. Show them how to be brave. And never let anyone tell them they're not enough. Because if they're anything like you, they'll be unstoppable. Give them my love. Every day. Lucas." I clutched the letter to my chest, unable to breathe through the ache that swelled up in me. I hadn't even told Lucas about the pregnancy when he wrote it, but somehow he had known. That was the kind of man he was: intuitive, present even when he wasn't in the room. He had left me the one thing I needed most: belief in myself. Later that evening, Dad found me sitting in the nursery, the letter open on my lap. He wheeled over slowly and looked at the envelope before quietly asking, "Do you want to read it out loud?"
So I did.
Afterward, we sat there for a long time, the silence warm and full. "You know," Dad said eventually, "when your mother was pregnant with you, she used to sing to her belly. Said it made you dance." I smiled, my eyes glistening. "What did she sing?" He chuckled softly. "Terrible 70s love songs. She was off-key every time." That night, I sang too. Not because I had a perfect voice, but because it made me feel close to both of them. Lucas, my mom. This baby wasn't just mine. He was a part of everyone I had ever loved and lost. He was born from struggle and joy and hope. As the months passed, I prepared the house room by room. I washed every tiny onesie, installed a baby monitor, and picked out names with Dad. He joked that he'd veto anything too fancy, so we kept it simple. Strong. Timeless. One afternoon, while organizing documents in the kitchen drawer, I paused and looked out through the open window. The breeze carried the scent of tomatoes and mint from the garden. I watched Dad dozing in his chair under the patio umbrella, a book resting in his lap, his head tilted in peaceful sleep. For a moment, everything felt exactly as it should be. No fear. No noise. No shadows. Just love, stretching forward into the future like an unbroken thread. It was early spring when I reached the final trimester. The garden had started blooming again, early tulips and daffodils pushing through the soil like small promises. I spent more and more time at home, resting when I could, writing in the baby journal, and savoring quiet moments. Each kick from inside reminded me of how close I was to holding a piece of Lucas in my arms. Dad became even more protective, refusing to let me lift anything heavier than a pillow. Every time I stood too quickly, he'd narrow his eyes and say, "Sit down before I tie you to that rocking chair." I'd laugh and tease him back, but I knew it was his way of feeling useful, of shielding us both from the ache that never fully left either of us. I had chosen a soft mint green for the nursery walls, and Dad insisted on painting them himself. I watched from the doorway, my hands resting over my belly, while he carefully lined the edges with painter's tape and worked his way across the room with calm, measured strokes. "Not bad for an old man in a wheelchair," he joked, tipping the roller toward me with a smile. "You're not old," I said. "You're vintage." He laughed so hard the brush slipped and left a streak on the ceiling. Every afternoon, we'd sit together and talk about what Lucas might have said, what kind of father he would have been. Dad said Lucas would have been the kind who learned how to braid hair, who stayed up building model rockets, who made Saturday morning pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, just because. I believed that too. One evening, I went through the keepsake box I had been building. Ultrasound photos, letters, a few printed photos of Lucas and me, and his last letter, folded carefully in a soft blue envelope. I added a new item, a photo of Dad and me, taken just a week before, sitting in the garden under a sky full of blossoms. He had one arm slung around my shoulders and a quiet pride in his smile. This baby wasn't just coming into the world with love. He was being born into a legacy of survival, compassion, and unwavering family. Around that time, I also received a letter from Mr. Clark's office. It contained the final legal documents from the estate, everything officially closed, transferred, secure. I was now the sole owner of the house, of the savings, and of Lucas's trucking insurance. It felt strange holding those papers in my hands. I didn't feel like someone who had won anything, but I did feel like someone who had endured. I filed everything neatly, placed the keys to the old apartment in a labeled box in case I ever needed them, and stood in the middle of my living room with a steady breath. Janet and Vanessa never showed up again. There were no lawyers, no calls, no further attempts to intrude. Whether they had finally accepted defeat or simply disappeared back into whatever shadows they came from, I didn't care. My home was quiet, safe, sacred. On a sunny Sunday, as I walked slowly through the yard, I paused beneath the dogwood tree that Lucas had planted the year we moved in. Its branches were thick with white blossoms, glowing in the light. I closed my eyes, let the breeze move through my hair, and whispered, "He'll be here soon." Dad wheeled up beside me and placed a hand gently on my arm. "He's going to be loved every single day of his life." I looked at him, heart full, just like I was. And as the petals floated gently to the ground around us, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. It was almost time. It was just after dawn when I felt the first real contraction. I had been expecting false alarms. I'd read enough to know that your body plays tricks in the final weeks, but this was different. It wasn't sharp or panicked. It was deep and steady, like a wave rolling up from the ocean floor. I sat up slowly, resting both hands on my belly, whispering, "Okay, little one, I think it's time." I called out to Dad, who had always been a light sleeper. Within seconds, he was in my room, fully awake and calm, but his eyes were wide with alertness. "Hospital bag ready?" he asked. "By the door," I said, breathing through another contraction. He rolled to the front entrance while I slipped on shoes and pulled my sweater over my belly. The car ride was quiet, the road still empty under the pale morning light. I held onto the handle above the door, timing the waves that now came every 5 minutes. Dad kept glancing over at me like he wanted to say something, but didn't want to distract me. At the hospital, a nurse met us with a wheelchair already waiting. "Your full term?" she asked, guiding me through the double doors. "Due in 3 days," I managed between breaths. "You've got great timing," she said warmly, helping me into the elevator. The hours that followed were slow and aching, but I never felt alone. Dad stayed in the waiting area, refusing to leave even for coffee. Every time I opened my eyes, he was still there through the glass, watching, waiting, clutching the folded photo of Mom that he kept in his wallet. The labor room was quiet, dim, calm. A kind nurse rubbed my back between contractions, humming something soft. When the time came, everything narrowed to that single moment. The pain, the pressure, the sound of my own breath. And then, all at once, I heard him. A cry. High, loud, and alive. My son. The doctor handed him to me, and he was perfect. Red-faced, squirming, and wrapped in a blue blanket with a tiny knit cap pulled over his head. I pulled him close, tears running freely down my cheeks as I pressed my lips to his forehead. "Hi," I whispered. "Hi, baby. I'm your mom." I looked up at the nurse and asked if Dad could come in. A few minutes later, the door creaked open and he wheeled in slowly, eyes misty as he saw the bundle in my arms. "Would you like to hold him?" I asked. He nodded, barely able to speak. I passed the baby gently into his arms, and the look on my father's face, pure awe, trembling joy, was something I will carry with me until the day I die. "He looks like Lucas," he said softly, "especially the mouth." I smiled. "He's got my ears, though. Poor kid." Dad chuckled, tears running down his cheeks. "He's perfect." I named him Elijah Lucas Walker. Elijah for new beginnings. Lucas, of course, for the man who taught me what love should look like. Back home, the house felt different again, but not emptier. Warmer. Fuller. The rocking chair moved with a new rhythm, one that matched the breathing of a sleeping baby against my chest. Dad took morning bottle duty while I caught up on sleep. We turned the guest room into a playroom. I taped Lucas's letters into a journal I'd one day give to Elijah when he was old enough to understand. Every day I looked at my son and thought, "You are the reason I didn't fall apart." And every night, I whispered to him the words his father had once written. "You're going to be unstoppable." The days after Elijah's birth blurred together in a beautiful, exhausting rhythm. Feedings at 2 a.m., lullabies at 4, naps curled up on the couch with him resting on my chest. It was a routine that left me drained, but never empty. There was something profoundly healing in caring for him. Every soft coo, every tight little fist clinging to my shirt was a reminder that life, my life, was still moving forward. Dad was beyond smitten. He wheeled through the house like a general on a mission, always ready with a bottle, a burp cloth, or one of the books he'd already begun reading aloud to Elijah. I watched them one afternoon as Dad read a children's story with exaggerated voices. Elijah nestled in his arms, blinking up at him. My heart swelled with something that felt like peace, the kind I hadn't known since before Mom died. I often thought about how different this could have turned out, how easily I could have been alone. If Lucas hadn't taken the time to prepare that will, to protect us in every way possible, if Dad hadn't been so steady through it all, if I hadn't found the strength to stand up to Janet and Vanessa. Speaking of them, they never returned. No phone calls. No letters. No mysterious legal notices. They had finally disappeared from our lives, like a dark storm that had passed without the need for cleanup. And I didn't miss them. Not for a second. The house, our lives, our hearts. Everything was better without their bitterness staining it. One quiet Saturday, I took Elijah out to the garden for the first time. It was mid-morning, the sun just warm enough, the breeze soft and steady. I laid a blanket on the grass and placed him beside me. He gurgled happily, arms flailing, eyes wide at the flickering tree branches overhead. "I'm going to tell you everything about your dad," I whispered, brushing a leaf from his tiny hand. "How he made people feel safe. How he loved pancakes and classic rock. How he fought for us even when he wasn't here to see it." Dad rolled over from the patio, smiling. "Telling him stories already?" "Of course," I said. "He deserves to know the truth." We sat there for hours, the three of us, in the garden that Lucas had helped build. A space that had once been just earth and empty soil now bloomed with life. Much like our little family. Later that week, I added a new frame to the shelf in the nursery. A picture of Lucas and me, smiling beneath the dogwood tree, next to a photo of Elijah swaddled in blue. Above it, I placed the words I had written in my journal the night Lucas died. "We may bend, but we do not break." And below it, I added something new. He lives on in every breath this child takes. Elijah would grow up knowing who his father was, not just in name, but in legacy, in love, in laughter, in every bedtime story read by his grandfather, and every seed we planted in that blooming backyard. One evening, as I rocked Elijah to sleep, his head resting peacefully against my shoulder, I whispered softly into the hush of the room. "You are made of strength, little one, of kindness and fire and grace. You are your father's son, and you are everything I ever needed." Outside, the garden swayed under the wind, and inside, love bloomed in every corner. Time, I've learned, doesn't ask for permission. It just moves forward one breath at a time. And somehow, despite the grief, despite the heartbreak and the long, silent nights, so did we. Elijah grew quickly, as babies do. He went from sleeping in the crook of my arm to crawling across the living room floor like a tiny explorer, always determined, always curious. His first word was "Dada." I cried for an hour after that, not from sadness, but from gratitude. Somehow, Lucas had left a mark so deep, even our son, who never met him, felt it. Dad joked that Elijah was stubborn like me and observant like Lucas. "He's got your glare when he's annoyed," he said once, laughing. "But when he smiles, it's all Lucas." Our days became filled with simple joys. Story time on the rug. Afternoon walks with a stroller beneath the dogwood trees. Evenings spent baking cookies we never quite got right. And nights where I'd sit on the porch with a baby monitor beside me, looking up at the stars and wondering if Lucas was out there somewhere, watching, guiding, proud. The house stayed filled, not with noise, necessarily, but with life. The quiet kind. The kind where a toy left in the hallway feels like a sign of joy, not clutter. Where the sound of Dad's wheelchair creaking down the hall still meant love was near. And where every baby giggle echoed as a reminder. We survived. We rebuilt.
We lived.
On Elijah's first birthday, we threw a small party in the backyard. Balloons tied to the fence. Cupcakes topped with blue frosting. A handful of neighbors, Zoe, and some coworkers from the tax office joined us. Dad gave a short toast that made everyone cry. He said, "A year ago, I wasn't sure how we'd keep going. But this boy right here, he gave us something to fight for. And Rebecca, she gave us the strength to do it." I didn't think I'd say anything, but I stood up, holding Elijah on my hip, and said, "This house isn't just our home. It's proof. Proof that love is louder than loss. That kindness can outlive cruelty. That even after the worst pain, joy can return." Zoe cheered. Dad raised his sparkling cider. Elijah clapped, completely unaware but happy to be the center of attention. After everyone left and the balloons swayed gently in the dusk, I sat on the porch with Elijah curled up in my arms. He was drifting off, his tiny chest rising and falling with each sleepy breath. I looked around our yard, our garden, and realized how far we'd come. This wasn't the life I had once imagined. It was better, because it was real. It was earned, and it was ours. "I love you, baby boy," I whispered, rocking slowly. "And I love your daddy. Always." The stars began to blink to life overhead. In that moment, I knew we were going to be okay. More than okay. We were home. We were whole. And we were enough. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us bring more powerful and emotional stories to life. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring journeys of strength, love, and resilience. Thank you for watching.